Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video and talk about this subject that I thought was very particularly interesting. And I thought that I was going to make this video a little bit shorter and just review it by that of Dante's Boxing Nation. But Dante, when it comes down to a lot of his arguments, I just don't find him to be the most intelligent commentator. And Boxing Ego, even though, of course, I think that I wouldn't say that he's an Albert Einstein of boxing necessarily, but at the end of the day, he does present his arguments in a more intelligent way. I wouldn't say that he's the most logical commentator because, of course, he is a part of the LDBC and new media cult. But at the end of the day, he does present his arguments in more of a logical and more of a valuable way, in my view, that actually brings something to that of the commentary, or if I plan to review it. But anyways, for those of you that, for those of you overall that have heard the news, apparently at least by that of a source, Canelo Alvarez, it's very possible that he could be fighting that of Jermall Charlo next, and then right after that, that of Mr. Terence Bud Crawford, who many people take a look to be as the number one pound for pound fighter. And of course, Canelo Alvarez right now is getting a great amount of criticism, of course, from some of his detractors, but just also from a certain amount of boxing fans in general. Because, of course, there is the main fight that everyone right now wants to see, and that is the David Benavidez fight. And I already knew that the David Benavidez fight was not going to happen in terms of May, but the fight is going to happen at the very least, if not this year in September. It's going to have to happen next year in May. Canelo Alvarez is going to have to fight that of David Benavidez. If not, he is going to have a very big black mark on that of his resume and a very big black mark within his career. Because even if he decided to retire today, people are always going to ask, why did you not fight that of David Benavidez? You were willing to unify the division completely, but you were not willing to fight that of David Benavidez. And I think that Canelo Alvarez, I think that eventually he is going to fight that of David Benavidez. I'm not really quite sure if I'm believing the fact that he's going to face that of Terence Bud Crawford. I don't think that Canelo Alvarez has a great amount of interest in that fight. He expressed multiple times that he's not super duper interested in that fight, but we'll see what happens. At the end of the day, I don't necessarily mind the Jaime Munguia or Jermall Charlo fight next, because that's a fight that, in my view, could kind of be a good build-up before that of the David Benavidez fight. But a Terence Bud Crawford fight, I just see no appeal of that fight. Because Terence Bud Crawford, in my view, is just way too small of a fighter for that of Canelo Alvarez. Now, once again, would it really be, a fighter going up 3 weight classes? I mean, he'd be going up 3 weight classes, but Canelo Alvarez is not really a natural 168-pounder. Canelo Alvarez is more of a natural 160-pounder. He's more of a natural middleweight. So it'd be more of a Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler type of situation. But at the end of the day, I just don't see much interest in it because I just think that Terence Bud Crawford, I just think that he'd be way too small. I think that when you talk about both of those fighters, that they're both about on the same level in terms of skills. But I think that when you talk about the size, that I think that Canelo clearly, even though of course he's going to be shorter and he's not going to have the same reach as Crawford, is not going to matter because the amount of girth and the amount overall of size that Canelo and power that Canelo Alvarez has, I just think it's going to be way too much for Terence Bud Crawford. But Canelo Alvarez, he's starting to realize, I think, that this David Benavidez fight, that is the fight that everybody wants to see. And if he does try to feed people overall the Terence Bud Crawford fight after that of the David Benavidez fight, he is going to receive a lot of criticism and deserved criticism. Because there's no reason to fight that of a Terence Bud Crawford when you're fighting that, or when there's a fight at 168 that everyone is calling for, and that more than likely has now stood out right now like a sore thumb, especially after that of the Caleb Plant and that of, what's his name, Demetrius Bobo Andrade after those two fights. So the David Benavidez fight clearly is the fight that has to happen next. I don't mind if another fight ends up happening next, but at the end of the day, he is going to have to fight David Benavidez, more than likely this year. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, however, that being said, let me also state this. Because the LDBC and new media, they are quite obnoxious. Because these are still the same people that stated that at least Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, they're the same guys that said that, Crawford, he clearly is the number one pound for pound fighter in the world. And that he would beat up Canelo Alvarez, that, he would knock him out if he moved up in weight and blah, blah, blah. And now, allegedly, now that this fight might be happening, now all of a sudden they're saying that they're not going to give him credit for it. So at the end of the day, the reason why it's so obnoxious is because these guys always love to talk all this shit, but at the end of the day, a lot of the times, all they're doing is just selling pure wolf tickets. They're just talking the talk. Because a lot of the times when they say something, they don't even truly believe it. And that's why every single time when Canelo was about to fight Jermall Charlo, all of a sudden he's fighting him at his worst, and he didn't put on his best performance and blah, blah, blah. And at the current moment in time, I would tend to agree with that, because Jermall Charlo just looks like a done fighter to me. But even when Canelo was about to fight him a couple of years ago, when Jermall Charlo, I believe, was still somewhat active, all of a sudden it wasn't a good time because he didn't look that great against Juan Macias Montiel and all this other stuff. But remember, Jermall Charlo was supposed to embarrass out of Canelo Alvarez. But remember, Canelo coming off of a bad performance, it doesn't matter if you face Canelo Alvarez then, go and beat him. We don't care. Canelo coming off of a surgery, fight Artur Beterbiev, fight Dimitri Bivol, fight all these guys. And the reason why these guys come across as so obnoxious is because they clearly are very motivated by that of their racial pride. And when you do that, a lot of the objectivity and logic just goes out the window. And I don't agree with the Terence Bud Crawford fight either. I think that it is nowhere near as good as the David Benavidez fight. But at the end of the day, if you're going to bitch, moan, and complain like what Dante and Aki TV do about, Canelo would lose to that of Crawford and, Crawford would beat him up and Canelo probably wouldn't even be willing to fight him. And then the fight is allegedly going to happen and now you have a problem with it. It just comes across as very fake and it comes across as very disingenuous. But, it is what it is. And also remember, these are the same guys that claim that Lomachenko, who pretty much was a natural 130-pounder, that he should go up to 147 and fight that of Manny Pacquiao, who's probably, a natural 140-pounder. But remember, these are the same people. Remember when Lomachenko was ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and they said that Lomachenko needs to fight Terence Bud Crawford, that he needs to fight, that Manny Pacquiao fighters that pretty much were natural welterweights, because they're, we need to see how they would compare on the pound-for-pound list, but now with Crawford and Canelo Alvarez is completely different. And don't get me wrong, those people are not logical, so I don't hold the same standards. At the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez is going to have to get in the ring with David Benavidez. That is the main fight that I'd like to see, and that is the main fight that, in my view, would propel Canelo Alvarez possibly back to the #1 pound-for-pound spot. Not that of Terence Bud Crawford, and not Jermall Charlo. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, Boxing Ego is going to talk about it. Let's tune in.
Hey, payday. You want payday? I say payday. You want payday? Canelo Alvarez could fight Terence Crawford. Does he? That's what I want to.
Let me also say this, and this is probably going to be mentioned later on in the video, but there's this narrative going around, let's be real, by that of the pro-black cult, known as the LDBC in the media, that Canelo always fights guys off their worst performance, and that's why I can't give him credit, blah, 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 all this are bullshit, and all that is a bunch of horse shit. Canelo Alvarez fought Gennady Golovkin when he was on a tear. He fought Erislandy Lara when he got the couple of the biggest wins of his career. He fought that, I believe, of, what was his name? Sergey Kovalev, after coming off of a dominant win over Eleider Alvarez and a dominant knockout win over Anthony Yarde. He fought Miguel Cotto when he was more revived and great in his career. He fought Austin Trout after the biggest win in his career against Miguel Cotto. All right, he fought Dimitri Bivol, when he didn't have knockout, but when he was always very dominant when it came down to it, And then on top of that, he fought other fighters when they looked very good as well. Saunders, people claim that he didn't look like the same fighter, but that really wasn't the case. It's just that he moved in a different weight class and he was having a little bit more problem with the weight class. But at the end of the day, they were still both natural middleweight fighters, so it was still a great fight to make. And he also fought Caleb Plant at the best point in time in his career. He fought Danny Jacobs coming off of a very good win over Sergey Dervyachenko. The same guy that allegedly Canelo ducked at the middleweight division, according to these guys. Danny Jacobs beat that guy, and Canelo beat him, when he beat that guy. Callum Smith apparently did not have the greatest performance against John Ryder, but he still was a top-tier level champion in that weight class. And there's some other fights that I'm sure I'm not mentioning. He fought Jermall Charlo when he was the complete unified champion at 154, or at least was. So, this bullshit about, Canelo always fights guys at their worst. All that is a bunch of horseshit. They just don't want Canelo Alvarez to be remembered as an all-time great fighter.
Talk about
and you'll notice with Tyson Fury and Canelo Alvarez especially, because they know more than likely that they're going to be remembered as all-time great fighters. That's the reason why they tell you this bullshit about, I can't even have Canelo over Marco Antonio Barrera or Eric Morales. Guys that never, ever, ever would have been in the debates as the greatest or the #1 pound-for-pound fighter of their generation. Like, get the fuck out of here.
Video. A lot going on.
But Gervonta Tank Davis, he's the face of boxing. And, now, of course, the face of boxing is a little bit of a different argument. That isn't always about your resume. That's just about the amount of numbers that you get. But Gervonta Tank Davis, yet he gets no criticism for the bums that he's been facing for basically his whole entire career. But it is what it is. Anyway, and don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean that just because Gervonta Tank Davis does not receive criticism, that Canelo Alvarez is immune to it. And I have a great amount of respect for Canelo Alvarez. He is an all-time great fighter in my view. But at the end of the day, you are going to have to fight David Benavidez.
Hit the subscribe button. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. According to ESPN, they believe they may know Canelo's very next move. Actually, his next two moves with premier boxing champs, Salvador Rodriguez. He put out this. Now, there's a video report and also written text, and he's saying that Canelo could fight against first Jermall Charlo, the other brother, because he already fought Jermall at this point. And then he might go after Terence Crawford, according to his sources.
And let me tell you what, if Canelo Alvarez does go after that Jermall Charlo, and then he goes after Terence Bud Crawford, I could kind of see where Canelo Alvarez is coming from in terms of what he thinks it will do for his legacy, in terms of beating the number one fighter of his generation, so he can kind of end that argument. But I'm not really quite sure 100% if that'll end the argument, because Crawford clearly is at a size disadvantage against Canelo Alvarez. Especially more than that of what a Jermall Charlo is. Especially, at least Jermall you can kind of argue is a natural 160 pounder, and Canelo is really more of a natural 160 pounder than what he really is, a super middleweight. But at the end of the day, or a 168 pounder. But at the end of the day, Crawford is a legitimate welterweight. So, I'm not quite sure how much that would really do for his career. But maybe Canelo Alvarez's plans are to fight Charlo, then Crawford, then go after David Benavidez. That way, if he loses to David Benavidez, he can say, well, look at how many good names I beat in my career. And Benavidez kind of beat me when I was a little bit older and coming off of these great wins against these fighters, overall. And, after beating the number one pound for pound fighter in my generation, because fighters think about that. And let me tell you what, I'm not going to say that Canelo is necessarily avoiding that of David Benavidez, at least, as of yet, because Canelo has always shown me in the past that he's willing to fight that of the best. But I think that he clearly sees David Benavidez as a big threat. And if he does not fight him by September, then it will be very apparent to me that Canelo Alvarez, that he clearly is not wanting to fight that of David Benavidez, or avoiding him, or wanting to push him to the side, or at least save him overall for the absolute last resort.
Now, let's see. Let's see if this is the tweet. Benavidez's entourage feels that the fight with Canelo does not come in May and perhaps not in September. Apparently last night, Canelo Charlo in May, and then we'll see who has the last word. So it's looking like Canelo versus Jermall Charlo. Now, stay tuned. I will explain why.
And I don't necessarily mind that of the Jermall Charlo fight, because many people have been calling for that fight for years. Now, at the end of the day, and Dante's Boxing Nation said something about Canelo Alvarez aging Jermall Charlo out. Jermall Charlo never really would have been a super huge threat to Canelo Alvarez anyway. Jermall Charlo just doesn't really have the boxing ability to compete with someone like Canelo Alvarez. At the end of the day, now that doesn't always mean necessarily just because I think that maybe a fighter didn't avoid a certain fighter. Do I believe that he avoided that of Jermall Charlo? No, I don't. Because at one point in time, Jermall Charlo actually turned down a contract with that of Canelo Alvarez. But that always seems to get lost within the space of time, within that of the LDBC and new media. And Jermall Charlo has really caused a certain amount of the own problems within his career, because he's really actually avoided a certain amount of the bigger fights. He avoided Andrade. He avoided overall that of Lara. He avoided that of Canelo Alvarez, at least within that of one fight. He avoided a certain amount of the others. And then on top of that, he called out David Benavidez. And then once David Benavidez called his bluff, then he ran out of the room with his tail in between his legs. So Jermall Charlo is he's never really shown any great interest in taking a lot of big fights.
I could see Canelo fighting against Jermall Charlo. So this ESPN reporter, his information is leading him to believe that Canelo could have a May and September fight, which is not abnormal. But he's saying it could be Crawford after Jermall Charlo.
And let me tell you what, I don't personally agree with that fight. I don't think that it's a good fight, and I would much rather have the David Benavidez fight over that of Crawford. But if you're one of these guys like Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV that was claiming that Canelo would get beaten by that of Terence Bud Crawford, and now you have a problem with the fight happening, then that shows me that you're a mega hypocrite, and that all the shit that you were talking in the first place, you didn't really believe. Which is what I've been saying about the LDBC and new media for a very long time anyway. But in my view, that is not the fight that needs to happen.
Ryder told that in comparison, Canelo is sensational, has a high boxing IQ, but Jaime hits harder, throws more, and receives more. Oh, that's so. I mean, that's kind of common sense. But it's interesting that he said Munguia hits harder.
I'm not quite sure if Munguia hits harder. Once again, a lot of these guys, they take a look at certain fighters against Canelo Alvarez and they say that, oh, David Benavidez and Munguia and, Charlo and some of these other guys, they hit harder than that at Canelo Alvarez. Well, I'm not really sure if it's that they hit harder, or just they're not facing usually that of elite level competition. Jaime Munguia is a very hard puncher. I'm not really quite sure where he would rank in terms of hard punchers, but I'm not quite sure if he punches harder than Canelo Alvarez. I definitely don't think that he punches harder than a prime Canelo Alvarez, but right now, I don't know. To be fair, Canelo Alvarez has not been able to get a knockout within his past 2 fights. He wasn't able to get a knockout over John Ryder, and he wasn't able to get the knockout over Jermall Charlo. And one could debate that he could have probably, gotten, or, that he should have gotten the knockout in both of those fights.
So right here, by the way, everything looks
and
like...
one does have to wonder that if Canelo Alvarez's power is starting to wane a little bit, is that going to be a major factor in the David Benavidez fight? Because Canelo is going to have a great amount of power against David Benavidez. He's also going to have better stamina than what he had in the Dimitri Bivol fight.
Like it would be.
I don't have a doubt in my mind that the best version of Canelo versus the best version of David Benavidez, that Canelo is the better version, or the better fighter. But at the end of the day, Benavidez is probably bigger by about 2 weight classes than that against Canelo Alvarez, or at least 1.5 at the very least. And on top of that, he's getting better and more intelligent with every single fight, and he does have great conditioning, and he is a great pressure fighter. So will Canelo Alvarez be able to handle that? We do know that Canelo in the past that he has not had great stamina within that of certain fights, that he's had a little bit of issues with that, and he is getting older. He's been fighting professionally and against usually great levels of competition for 18 years.
Charlo and then Crawford for Canelo in 2024 in that order. Wow. Charlo, and then Crawford for Canelo in that order. I don't even know what to say. I really don't. I mean, it's rare that I'm speechless in the words of boxing, like in the world of boxing, but I don't know. I don't know what y'all want me to say. What do y'all want me to do with that? Canelo versus Jermall Charlo. Listen, I could picture Canelo doing this, and I'm going to explain why. Because as I've told you, Canelo typically does not fight fighters at their very best.
Right, well, that's that once again has been proven to be a false narrative, but you're just saying that because you need to, have people try to realize that in your mind that you don't want Canelo Alvarez to be remembered as an all-time great fighter. So the LDBC and new media and the pro-black cult, they're using the same narratives as what many of the Floyd Mayweather Jr. detractors tried to use.
Fighters look exceptional. If fighters have been mowing through competition, guys like...
Right, but how many of the fighters overall really around Canelo Alvarez's weight class have really been just mowing through people? Really almost none of them. Was Demetrius Bouba really ever mowing through competition? I mean, he was mowing through tomato cans maybe, and even then not even looking super impressive. Jermall Charlo never really mowed through anybody when it came down to it. How many of those guys really just mowed through everybody? The only guys that I can really point out that mowed through everybody were Gennady Golovkin, David Benavidez, and Artur Beterbiev. Those are really the only guys that I can say where they just mowed through everybody.
I don't know.
And even David Benavidez, I wouldn't even say that he completely mowed through everybody. But you know what? That may not be completely fair to say, because even Gennady Golovkin had a very tough fight against Danny Jacobs. To be fair, the Caleb Plant fight, that was against a legit A-grade level fighter.
Benavidez. David Benavidez. Canelo usually doesn't pick him. But him and his fans, look, he looked guilty. Look at Canelo right there. He looked guilty. Look, he looked like he cherry picking. He looked guilty.
Well, here's the thing also, Mr. Boxing Ego. I don't know if I can really say that the next fight against Jermall Charlo is a cherry pick, especially once again because of all the hype after Jermall Charlo all these years. Now, I do agree overall that Jermall Charlo is not quite the same fighter, and in my view, he looks like a mentally done fighter. I would still probably label him as an A- level fighter. But to be honest with you, I've always only had Jermall Charlo as an A- level fighter. I've never had either of the Charlo brothers above that. I've never had them above that. They don't have the resume. They don't have the skill set. So you could claim that Jermall Charlo at this point in time is about a B+ level fighter. You really could. So at the end of the day, I understand where Ego and some of these other guys are coming from. David Benavidez is the fight that needs to happen. But Jermall Charlo, once again, a lot of these guys still claim that Jermall Charlo would be one of the top 168 pounders. And Boxing Ego also claimed a couple of days ago that he would have him beat Jaime Munguia, who I would probably rank as an A- level fighter. So if you have at least Jermall Charlo on that level, then you can't have a big problem at least with this fight happening next, as long as the David Benavidez fight happens in September.
Just look at the man in his eye. Hey, I was pay you want pay. Look, he look. If he looks guilty, put guilty in the comment section. That's all I want to see in the comment section. If you think he honestly looks guilty of what I'm about to pin on him, then just type guilty in the comment section. But this is really no mystery. Canelo's all over the place, right? 1 minute he says, I don't want to fight Mexican fighters, which makes no sense because you fought Mexican fighters. How you don't want to...
Right, but I don't think people overall really understand what Canelo Alvarez was trying to say with that. I think what Canelo Alvarez, what he was stating is that Canelo was trying to say, I'm trying to leave legacy for other fighters, and I don't overall really want to get in the ring with other Mexican fighters, so the championship pedigree can grow within that of my country, but if I have to fight them, then I will. At least that's the way that I took it. But at the end of the day, once again, he is going to have to fight that of David Benavidez.
Fight Mexican fighters when you Mexican. How you don't want to fight Mexican fighters when you fought Mexican fighters? Alfredo El Perro Angulo. Guys like Julio...
Right, but Canelo Alvarez's legacy overall was not built by them. And I think that Canelo Alvarez looked at it and said that if I fight a certain amount of these other Mexican fighters that, I'm not overall going to be able to grow, or the championship pedigree is not going to be able to grow within that of Mexico. That's the way that I took it. But who knows? Canelo Alvarez could have clearly meant it as, I don't want to fight David Benavidez and I don't feel like fighting him. It could have just been overall for that.
Cesar Chavez Jr., guys like Alfonso Gomez, guys like Miguel Vasquez. You fought him a couple of times.
Right, once again, but that was before Canelo Alvarez's legacy was set as an all-time great level fighter. And on top of that, he's trying to build his fan base in other areas outside over that of Mexico. So that's why I believe that Canelo Alvarez stated that.
Huh? Somebody got to explain why I ain't got... So Canelo, like I said, he's all over the place. He says, I don't care. I fight anybody. Like, no, you don't.
Well, no, yeah, he has fought everybody pretty much throughout his career. Now, of course, the Demetrius Bubu Andrade fight didn't happen, but is anyone really super upset that the Demetrius Bubu Andrade fight didn't happen? At the end of the day, Andrade had certain opportunities to fight certain guys, and on top of that, to stop fighting bums and possibly fight that with the PBC. He didn't do it, and on top of that, the first time that he ever fought real level competition, he couldn't even last past 6 rounds. So it is what it is. So people can say about Canelo Alvarez whatever they want to. Yes, there are certain fights that didn't happen, like Charlo and that of Demetrius Bubu Andrade. But with that, he's also had a dozen other fights to where those fighters were pretty much at the best point in time in their career, if not at the best point in time in their career.
I'm not trying to fight David Benavidez, and the world sees it. Now, the funny thing about my job is this. You're going to have buffoons.
And once again, isn't it very interesting how Gervonta Tank Davis gets completely off the hook for not fighting, Shakur Stevenson? Now, of course, Shakur Stevenson is coming off of a not-so-great performance, a terrible performance, or at least not a good performance according to his standards, against Edwin De Los Santos. David Benavidez is coming off of 2 very entertaining, and somewhat good performances over 2 A-grade level fighters. Or at least over 1 alleged A-grade level fighter, over Demetrius Bubu Andrade. So, or Andrade. So, at the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez is going to have to fight David Benavidez. The time is now.
You foolish infidels. In the comment section, oh, you're hating on Canelo, bro. He's just a hater. They're going to bring...
Right, I agree with you, Mr. Boxing Ego, and I agree with you that, it is time to now press Canelo Alvarez's feet to the fire. But at the end of the day, why are these same standards not applied to that of Gervonta Tank Davis? Because we all know whenever it comes to Gervonta Tank Davis, when he says that he's not interested in fighting Devin Haney or Shakur Stevenson, there's always some sort of excuse.
Video.
So I don't mind these standards at all, and I think that it's time for Canelo Alvarez to start getting criticized a little bit because we know that the David Benavidez fight needs to happen next. That's a fight that everybody wants to see. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to, you have to keep the same standards with your boy Gervonta Tank Davis.
I made 3-4+ years ago regarding Canelo versus Jermall Charlo. There was a point in time where I wanted to see that particular fight real bad. But just like anything in this world, not everything lasts forever.
Well, that's true, but the LDBC and new media, they talk all this shit about how certain fighters can beat that of Canelo Alvarez, and this happens, and he should go up to fight at light heavyweight, and then when he fought Dimitri Bivol, then he was ducking, even though they wanted Canelo Alvarez to fight at light heavyweight. They wanted him to fight Jermall Charlo, but every time that fight was allegedly about to happen, Jermall Charlo didn't look the same, or all this other bullshit, or he's fighting him off of his worst performance, and all this other bullshit. So at the end of the day, these guys can claim whatever they want to. But even a couple of years ago when Canelo was possibly about to face Jermall Charlo, they weren't happy with it anyway because they knew that Jermall Charlo was not going to beat Canelo Alvarez.
In fact, it's quite the contrary. Most things don't last forever. Like, for example, have you ever had a crush on somebody? Like, you were really into them and you thought they were like the finest woman around. That doesn't mean 4 years later, when the situation changed. Let's say everybody in your city or at your school or whatever, at your job, ran through the chick. Everybody dated the chick. She messed around and had multiple kids with multiple baby daddies. She dabbled in drugs. She didn't take care of herself, gained a little weight. Then that doesn't have any bearing 4 years later. You're like, oh, hey, Ego.
Yes, and I would agree with that. However, and I agree with what Ego is saying. I don't think that Jermall Charlo is quite mentally ready to be in the ring with championship level fighters. And Canelo's getting older, and I think that he's starting to wear down a little bit as a fighter. But he's still probably an A+ level fighter. So I do agree with Ego there. Jermall Charlo is not quite the same fighter that he once was. I agree with that now. Also, at the same time, I don't think that Canelo Alvarez is quite the same fighter that he once was. But Canelo is clearly in a much more better spot than what Jermall Charlo is right now. Jermall Charlo just looks completely mentally done as a fighter and with his life. So hopefully he's able to get over that depression. We'll see, or at least, if this fight does happen, hopefully he's able to get himself somewhat ready for that of the Canelo Alvarez fight and somewhat at least put up some level of competition. But to be honest with you, I think even the best version of Jermall Charlo, I don't even think that I pretty much thought that Canelo was going to whoop his ass. So at the end of the day, I just don't see it happening. But, I do agree with Mr. Boxing Ego there.
You said she was beautiful. I mean, look at like video vixens. In the early 2000s, there were some chicks and they was bad. But you look at some of them now and they might be doing bad. But again, what are you going to hold me to something I said in 2000?
But the reason why it's also very obnoxious with that of the LDBC and new media is because they always love to tell you about how Canelo is allegedly avoiding this guy, or, like Aki TV and Dante used to say that Canelo was going to avoid Caleb Plant, and then he fought Caleb Plant, and then all of a sudden Caleb Plant was this white boy with no power. He was going to avoid Billy Joe Saunders, and then he fights Billy Joe Saunders, coming off of apparently the worst performances in his career, and all sorts of bullshit. He won't fight at light heavyweight, but then he fights Sergey Kovalev and Dimitri Bivol, and then all of a sudden there's more excuses. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Canelo Alvarez at times that he hasn't fought a fighter that maybe was not either at the best point in time in his career or not coming off of the best performance. But at the end of the day, it just gets so obnoxious with these guys because they always seem to be willing to degrade a win overall, at least with the fighter that they know they need to tear down.
2015, when they were relevant and on the video screens and the video vixens.
Right, so what you're saying overall is that, if you're trying to make a comparison, that the last time Jermall Charlo was relevant was 2015, 2016. Jermall Charlo has been relevant overall pretty much for the past several years. Now he's been a little bit more irrelevant within that of the past couple of years because of a layoff and that deep depression. But at the end of the day, Jermall Charlo has still been a champion. And I would say the last time that he was really relevant was probably 2 to 3 years ago. But at the end of the day, he's still somewhat relevant enough. He is an undefeated fighter to the point to where I wouldn't mind this fight. But the David Benavidez fight is going to have to happen next. It's going to have to.
Like, it doesn't make sense. Ironically, the Canelo radical fans, they lack common sense and brain.
Right, and so do you, especially with some of your favorite fighters like Gervonta Tank Davis and Deontay Wilder. And that's not to try to put any criticism off of Canelo Alvarez, but I don't understand how Boxing Ego can always go on this criticism and say overall that they have no common sense and you guys are being biased with Canelo Alvarez. And it's very true that a lot of the times they can be. That's how fans are. But you do the same exact things with your favorite fighters, especially your new boy, Gervonta Tank Davis, your new lover.
Sales. So they're going to, oh, but hey, you said that you wanted to see Canelo or Jermall Charlo. The reason why I'm not really hyped about the fight now is because
Personally, I would rather see Canelo Alvarez versus Jaime Munguia, just because I think that Jaime Munguia is probably at a better point in his career than that of Jermall Charlo. I mean, Jermall Charlo was in that last fight against Jose Benavidez, but he was completely coasting within that fight. And if you're a fighter that's already naturally bigger than that of Jose Benavidez, and Jose Benavidez has never really been an elite fighter, I mean, the LDBC and the media, they kind of tried to push him up a little bit more than what he actually was to make it look like a bigger win on Crawford's resume. But at the end of the day, Jose Benavidez has never been a legitimate A-grade level fighter. And even with that, Jermall Charlo was still able to win pretty much almost every single round of the fight. Because Jose Benavidez, that's all you really need to do is coast in order to win against him. But I did not see the same Jermall Charlo with the same amount of fervor. I didn't see him with the same amount of motivation. I just didn't see the same Jermall Charlo. It looked like basically a ghost was in there against Jose Benavidez.
things have changed. You had Jermall Charlo, who's fought one time in the last several years. And the irony is this. You had
one time in the past several years. Well, he's fought one time within the past 2 to 3 years, I think is what you can say. But that he's fought one time within the past several years, to say that would be like you're acting like Jermall Charlo hasn't fought ever since that of 2016 or something.
Had Canelo fight fans, and they were counting off the days. Oh, Jermall Charlo's been inactive for 800 days. Oh, Jermall Charlo, he's a bum. This is the irony with all the Canelo radical fans. They say Jermall Charlo sucks. They say he's inactive. Start counting how many days he's been out the ring prior to the Jose Benavidez Jr. fight. All of these things. And then if Canelo picks Jermall Charlo, then they'll say, oh, this is a great fight. This is what you wanted. But majority of the people, including myself, that wanted this fight, we wanted it when we wanted it.
Well, listen, I'll agree with this. Jermall Charlo, in my view, is not the same fighter that I've seen against him like against Sergey Derevyanchenko. Now, Jermall Charlo, when people took a look at him against that of, that one Mexican fighter that he fought that he couldn't knock out, but that he got hit too much against, I still seen prime level Jermall Charlo there. It's just that Jermall Charlo has always been a little bit inconsistent. Jermall Charlo in certain fights, he's not going to have the best of times. He's going to look very, he's going to look very troublesome, like against Matt Korobov or against some other fighters. There's going to be some times where he kind of fights more to the level of his competition, and he clearly just has a certain amount of faults as a fighter, so that's just going to happen. But that last fight against Jose Benavidez, he looked like a shell of himself.
Just because you have a craving for pizza on a Tuesday doesn't mean by Saturday if you didn't get the pizza.
But the reason, once again, why so many people are also sick and tired of the LDBC and the media is because they can see right through their bullshit. Because even a couple of years ago when Jermall Charlo was more relevant, or even a few years ago when Canelo possibly was thinking about fighting Jermall Charlo, they still were not happy with it because, against Montiel, he was coming off the worst performance and all this other bullshit. But yet you notice Devin Haney never gets degraded by any of these channels for fighting that of Regis Prograis, because he came off of a very bad performance over Zorrilla, or that he came off of a shaky performance. Remember, Vasily Lomachenko apparently lost to that of Jermaine Ortiz, according to Boxing Ego. So then that means that Devin Haney fought Vasily Lomachenko, and Devin Haney coming off of the worst performance, he fought Lomachenko and Regis Prograis coming off of the worst performance in their careers, right? But you never hear anything about that. The truth of the matter is that, when it comes down to it, when it came to that of certain fighters, there's certain times where Canelo has fought a fighter where they didn't come off the greatest performance. But at the end of the day, certain fighters also fight to the level of their competition. And when they're a champion and when they're an undefeated level fighter, that fighter overall is going to have a different mentality, and they're really going to show up for that big fight against Canelo Alvarez. And they still were in the prime of their career, a lot of those fighters. So all that is really just a bunch of excuses. Now with Jermall Charlo, it is a little bit more valid, because a couple of years ago, he still was very relevant and looked to be a highly, at least a relatively highly skilled fighter. Someone that would have been, a top contender at 160 and 154. And, he probably still would, be there. But at the end of the day, I'm not really sure how much more is really left in him.
that you still want pizza. You might be in the mood. Things change, you know. Now I'm in the mood for tacos. I don't want Italian food because I didn't get it when I wanted. You know what I'm saying? Now I want something sweet. I want some ice cream. Yeah. Give me some hominy grits.
Some sweet chocolate ice cream like Gervonta Tank Davis. What Ego would do to him if he was able to take him to a hotel room.
I want some breakfast. I want breakfast in bed with some eggs. I said I want some eggs and chicken sausage. I want some hominy grits.
That's what Boxing Ego would do. That's what he would be telling Deontay Wilder or that of Gervonta Tank Davis. I'll fuck you till you love me, faggot.
Right? So that's the reality when it comes to Canelo. We wanted to fight. He didn't deliver the fight. And now he might deliver it when he wants, which is typical Canelo. So I'm not impressed.
Right, but the excuses have been coming against Canelo Alvarez for years upon years upon years. You're never impressed with Canelo Alvarez, but you're impressed with other fighters that allegedly might have the same amount of standards. It's clear that you just don't like Canelo Alvarez. It is what it is. He's one of the fighters that you have to try to tear down. Let's be real, because he's not a black fighter. But what I will say is this. I don't think overall that Jermall Charlo was quite the same fighter that he once was. But that also being said, many of these channels like Dante's Boxing Nation and some of the new media and LDBC channels, remember, Jermall Charlo was going to be the guy to allegedly embarrass Canelo Alvarez, him and Demetrius Bubu Andrade. So at the end of the day, if Jermall Charlo really, in terms of boxing ability, is really that much greater than Canelo Alvarez, then shouldn't Jermall Charlo still have a great chance to beat Canelo? That's how you know a lot of these guys, they never believed in a lot of the shit that they said in the first place. But me as a logical thinker myself, I agree that this is not the greatest option, or at least not the best option on the table. I don't mind the fight because Jermall Charlo is a fight that everyone kind of wanted at one point in time, you know. But at the end of the day, do I believe that Jermall Charlo was quite as good as what he once was? No.
As far as him fighting Crawford, I don't even know if that's true. I could definitely see him fight.
I agree. I'm not really quite sure if that's true or not. I'm not really 100% trusting this source. I think that Canelo Alvarez more than likely will either fight Jermall Charlo or Jaime Munguia next, but I'm not really quite sure about the Terence Crawford rumor.
Jermall Charlo, because like I said,
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. I would give it about a 40 to 30% chance, but I'm going to bet more than likely that fight does not happen.
Been inactive.
And keep in mind that Canelo Alvarez has already talked about possible plans to fight David Benavidez in that of September. But none of these channels are focusing on that rumor. They're only focusing on the possible bad rumors about Canelo because, once again, they need you to possibly believe that Canelo is not an all-time great fighter. That's all this propaganda is for you to remember that Canelo, in their minds at least, or that for them, that he will never, ever be an all-time great level fighter. That's the reason overall for all these, videos.
This weight, he fought Jose Benavidez and didn't stop him, and he just beat Jermall Charlo. And because we know he don't want to fight David Benavidez. That's the other reason.
Well, we'll see overall about, Canelo Alvarez and David Benavidez. I think that Canelo knows that eventually he's going to have to fight David Benavidez. And Canelo has always proven to me that he's willing to get in the ring, usually with the best of the best eventually. At least the main guys that everyone is calling for. And I know a lot of people will say, well, what about Andrade? What about Jermall Charlo? How many people were really asking for the Andrade fight? And don't get me wrong, it's not that Andrade was not somewhat of a threat. It's not that he wasn't a top contender. But the dude had a very little following, and on top of that, he never really put on super great performances. He didn't really have a super fan-pleasing, friendly style. And at the end of the day, I'm not saying that fight should have not happened or that Canelo should have not fought him. But at the end of the day, when you're a fighter and, you are somewhat relatively talented like Demetrius Bubu Andrade, when you're somewhat of a threat like that, but you have basically no following, and then on top of that, you give the fighters no excuse to basically fight you, and then on top of that, you don't sign with the PBC, and there's certain fights that you also turn down. At the end of the day, it is what it is.
He don't want to fight David Morrell. People in his actual weight class. And listen, don't tell me anything. If you can't understand this, then it's not meant for you. Do what you want. Unsubscribe from the channel. Don't listen to me. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. But if you can't understand this, Canelo is undisputed at super middleweight, and he's not fighting super middleweights.
I do agree with that. Canelo Alvarez is eventually going to have to fight that of David Benavidez. Now, Jermall Charlo, he might get away with it a little bit. I'm not sure if he's ranked there or not. I don't know. But at the end of the day, yes, Canelo Alvarez is somewhat holding those belts hostage. I don't actually mind some of the fights overall that he's fighting there. But at the end of the day, yes, he is going to have to fight David Benavidez, or at least a great mandatory there sooner or later. I do agree.
If this is true, what ESPN Knockout is saying, that Canelo's 2024 would consist of Jermall Charlo, who's never fought at 60.
Love music gear, but hate the price? When you buy used and like new music gear on Reverb,
That Canelo's 2024 would consist of Jermall Charlo, who's never fought at 68, missed weight, and
Right, but let me also just state this, because Ego and Dante, they've been making these bullshit ass excuses for such a long ass time. Now, if we're talking about overall that that Canelo was still able to hold on to the belts and he's not fighting 168 pounders for this long, then you have a relevant point. But at the end of the day, Boxing Ego always loves to talk about these stupid ass points about how he's bringing up Jermall Charlo who's never fought at 168. Right, but Canelo Alvarez, was that an excuse for him when he lost to Dimitri Bivol? Like, come on. Jermall Charlo and Andrade, these guys are allegedly going to embarrass Canelo, and they're the biggest threats around. But at the end of the day, when Canelo Alvarez has to move up in weight, none of those excuses are ever made. Like, that's how you can know, that's how overall that they know damn well that those fighters are not on Canelo Alvarez's level.
didn't stop a smaller guy moving up that Terence Crawford stopped and Jose Benavidez. And then Crawford, that'll be 3 fights with PBC. Everybody wanted Canelo to sign with PBC, rightfully so. And that'll be 3 fighters that aren't actually 168 pounders.
And I would agree with that. If Canelo Alvarez is still able to hold on to the belts and he doesn't fight David Benavidez this year, then that would be reason for criticism.
Man, you come straight out of a comic book, man. This is embarrassing. This is truly embarrassing. I don't know anybody else. Like, it's funny because the Canelo fans and other fans, they say, oh, Gervonta Davis needs to fight somebody. He's
right, and he does. And because, overall you're too busy sucking his dick when it comes down to the overall, you don't like to give him any criticism. Because you still keep trying to allege that he's the main face of boxing, and right now Gervonta Tank Davis is the protected son of the LDBC and new media. He does need to fight somebody. He hasn't fought anybody. But I also agree that Canelo does need to fight that of David Benavidez.
30 years old. Well, Canelo's over 30, and he's undisputed, and he's holding the belts hostages. And if this is true, he's trying to fight 3 people with PBC, none of which have ever competed at 168 before.
Right, and I do agree with that criticism. But at the end of the day, you also have to criticize that of Gervonta Tank Davis when he doesn't show great interest in Shakur Stevenson or Devin Haney or Teofimo Lopez or any of those fighters. But yet there's no criticism that goes out of Gervonta Tank Davis's way.
For Jermall Charlo, and then you have Terence Crawford, and he would be moving up 3 weight classes from where he last fought. And
he'd be moving up 3 weight classes, but Terence Crawford really is a natural welterweight, and Canelo pretty much is a natural middleweight. People try to allege that, Canelo, he's, so big and he's a natural 168 pounder. Canelo is not really a natural 168 pounder. All right, he's not a natural 168 pounder. He is a natural 160 pounder. All right, it is what it is. And just like I told people, when you take a look at some of these fighters like Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Bubo Andrade, and David Benavidez and some of these guys, when you really let them rehydrate, they're all about the same size, if not bigger overall than that of Canelo Alvarez.
Where we have known him to fight for the last several years, which is welterweight, 147. Now, I know some people, they're like, oh, Crawford beats him, skills pay the bills. Bro, we're talking about weight. Weight matters. Skills matter, but weight does matter when you're dealing with skills. Like when 2 fighters have skills, and then, the deciding factor could be, and the separator could be who takes a punch better. Who's head.
I agree, and on top of that, Canelo Alvarez and Crawford, people can say whatever they want to, but both of those fighters pretty much at their best. There's certain things in my view that the other fighter does a little bit better. But at the end of the day, both of those fighters are very similar in terms of the skills that they bring to the table, or at least in terms of the level that they bring to the table. Both of those fighters are S-tier level fighters when they both fight. So if Canelo ends up kicking that at Terence Bud Crawford's ass, is Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, are they going to give Canelo credit, how they wanted, remember how they wanted Lomachenko to fight that at Terence Crawford and Manny Pacquiao? Remember that? Are they going to give credit to Canelo if he beats Crawford? We all know that that's not going to happen.
Who has a game plan that's more rugged.
And let me tell you what, if he did end up doing that, I wouldn't be super shocked because at the end of the day, what Canelo could do is that, listen, I'm going to fight Jermall Charlo, which is a fighter that I need on my resume because many people have been claiming for that fight for a very long time. And I can fight him. He's an elite level black champion, or at least was at one point in time. And then I can fight Crawford. And many people who will be saying that, Crawford was the #1 fighter of that era. If I end up whooping his ass or knocking him out in very bad fashion, people can basically shut up kind of about that, even though I am bigger in size. If I end up dominating him, then people will kind of shut up about that. And then maybe I can fight David Benavidez, and if I end up losing, I can just claim that I was a bit older and that he clearly was the bigger fighter and that I came off of 2 elite fights, especially over a fighter that was looked at as one of the better of my generation.
Right? Things like that. Because, like, even this is a beautiful performance by Crawford, but Errol Spence probably stayed at division too long, and he's a big dude.
Oh, please. Don't get me wrong. Errol Spence Jr. overall, when it comes down to it, I think that he probably would fit better at 154. Let's stop this Errol Spence Jr. was majorly drained crap.
But he's also probably killing himself to make weight. Canelo...
He's not killing himself to make weight. All right, I've seen fighters overall kill themselves to make weight. He's not killing himself to make weight. Devin Haney was killing himself to make weight at 135, in my view. Errol Spence Jr. was not killing himself to make weight at 147. Please.
Is fighting at 68. You know what I'm saying? So he's probably not, like, supremely weight drained because he hasn't fought his whole career at that particular weight. Canelo Alvarez started off lighter and then gradually moved up, and now he just keeps moving up somehow, right? So this is just laughable.
He said that he keeps moving up somehow. That might be a steroid allegation, but you know what? Canelo Alvarez at one point in time was caught on PEDs, so those allegations, they are always going to come his way, and deservedly so.
At this point, if Canelo picks those 2 fights, as ESPN is saying, I'm definitely rooting for Jermall Charlo. And then,
of course you are. You'll root over any fighter against that of Canelo Alvarez besides that of Gennady Golovkin, because Gennady Golovkin was the main threat. Of course you're rooting for that of Jermall Charlo, which is nothing wrong with that overall, but we all know why you're rooting for any fighter against Canelo Alvarez, because you need Canelo Alvarez to not be remembered as an all-time great level fighter.
I'm definitely rooting for Terence Crawford. If Canelo beats, and based on the last performance, you would probably favor, and I think it could be a difficult fight, but my thing is this, and I think if I know this, Canelo knows this. I don't know what to expect from Jermall Charlo because of his absence. I don't know what was lost.
Right, but he recently just had a fight. So Jermall Charlo, I'm not really quite sure if anything has been lost from his absence, but something might be lost overall because of his mind. I don't know if he has quite the same mindset. Jermall Charlo has just been completely drained ever since his baby mama drama.
In those 3
or his divorce with his wife.
Years. Because he had some family problem. I know he's in Africa now and, trying to get back gang. But it's still, to me, it's more of a wild card. Crawford, you don't really have to worry about him. He's roller skating with Floyd Mayweather right now. And at the Adult Movie Awards. He stays in shape. He stays boxing-centric and boxing-ready. To my knowledge, he doesn't poison his body. So, Crawford, he's...
Yes, like that of Errol Spence Jr.
built up that sweat equity. So, you naturally trust him to just be focused on boxing. I'm definitely rooting for Crawford if this happens because I'm a huge underdog supporter. I love
right, but you're not cheering for both of those fighters because of an underdog story. You're cheering for both of those fighters because you can't stand Canelo Alvarez and you hate his guts. Let's be real, Ego. Let's stop the bullshit. All these guys always love to say is that I'm rooting for these fighters because, I root for my country in America. All that is a bunch of horse shit. They just root for their favorite black fighters and they can't stand Canelo Alvarez. And listen, it is what it is. Whatever. But don't feed me this fake spoonful of bullshit about overall, I'm a huge underdog. Please, you can't stand Canelo. Just stop.
Good underdog story, and what Canelo is doing is wrong, simply put. So I'm definitely rocking with Crawford.
Well, if Canelo Alvarez fights out of Terence Bud Crawford, I would agree that is a wrong fight to make, at least at the moment. But when it comes down to it, I would not mind seeing the Jermall Charlo fight and then seeing that of the David Benavidez fight. But that fight is going to have to happen.
For Canelo. Now, I don't know if he beats him. I don't. This is not a fight prediction. But I'm telling you, I would rock with Crawford because I don't like when people try to game the system. I want Crawford to prevail if Canelo's trying to pick on someone smaller.
You don't like when people try to game the system unless it's a fighter that you like Gervonta Tank Davis. So please.
And he keeps doing it, you know, I want Crawford to set history and, you know, put a stop to that.
And put a stop overall to Canelo Alvarez, who's a Caucasian Hispanic. When it comes down to it, you want to put a stop to Canelo Alvarez possibly being remembered as an all-time great fighter. That's really all it comes down to.
Because we got to get boxing back to its rightful spot.
Oh, please. Oh, please. Like there's not other fighters like Gervonta Tank Davis, overall, once again, who's not fighting one elite level fighter out there. You know, please.
We'll never get to the top at this rate, you know what I mean? If things don't happen and things that...
What you need to do, or what you need, is for Tyson Fury, Canelo Alvarez, Usyk, and Inoue to lose. That's really what you need.
Shake up the game of boxing need to happen. So let's go, Bud. Let's go, Charlo. Canelo, he keep picking on smaller people.
Charlo is not really smaller than that of Canelo Alvarez. Now, is he not a natural 168-pounder? I mean, well, he probably is a natural 168-pounder because he's probably a little bit bigger than Canelo. But at the end of the day, you know, overall, the point is not that Jermall Charlo is really smaller than that of Canelo Alvarez. Now, Crawford is for sure. But at the end of the day, Charlo is not really smaller than Canelo Alvarez. He's just not a natural 168-pounder. Now, if you have a problem with Canelo Alvarez, of course, not fighting 168-pounders, even though he's in that weight class, then I completely get it. But to say that Jermall Charlo is completely smaller than Canelo and he's never fought at 168 before, all that is a major excuse.
Subscribe.
Because you notice when Gennady Golovkin was going to fight Andre Ward, they never said that Gennady never fought at 168 before. You know, Lomachenko moved up to 135, that he had never fought at 135, or he's not a natural 135-pounder. You know, they never made these excuses. But then with their favorite fighters, they love to make these excuses. So please, spare me. But at the end of the day, Canelo is going to have to fight David Benavidez. No doubt about it. He's going to have to fight him. And I think that Canelo realizes that David Benavidez is a major threat right now, and probably the biggest threat out there to him from 160 to 168. And that he more than likely is going to have to fight him. But it is very possible that Canelo might take one or two more fights before he realizes that he's going to have to take that fight. But hopefully that fight happens at the end of this year. But if that fight does not happen at the end of this year, Canelo is going to get a much-deserved torching from that of the media and that overall of boxing fans everywhere. Because that's the fight that everybody wants to see. And that criticism will be very much well-deserved. Because there's no reason overall to keep those belts hostage. And then on top of that, fight, you know, a certain amount of the other guys there and then not fight David Benavidez. So I would agree that Canelo Alvarez is ducking or avoiding David Benavidez if he does not fight him this year. I would wholeheartedly agree. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. We'll see where Canelo Alvarez goes because Canelo has always shown me usually that eventually he will fight that of the bigger names and that he's usually willing to fight pretty much everybody out there. But we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.